Hello, can you hear me? Good. I feel a bit like perhaps the worst Madonna impression. Um, okay, so just before I start, some hopefully useful information. I made a link for the PDF of this, so you can download it. The link's there. I'll show you again on the last slide if you want to take a photograph. So don't feel like you have to take any of this in at all. You can download it and digest it. I've tried to make it as full of useful resources as I can, and I've made hyperlinks on most, if not all, of the resources, so you can go online and get to the real stuff, not just my misquoting of the real stuff. I've credited a colleague of mine here, Edward, he's in my team, and I've cannibalized quite a lot of his slides. That's why he's on the credit here. He's not actually here, but he's partly to blame for the content. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to present hopefully some good strategies and tactics for, I've called it high volume digitization and digital preservation, really because that's what we do at the BFI, but hopefully these resources and tactics are useful for any volume of digitization and digipres of moving image. And that's really my aim in this, is to give you resources that are helpful and strategies that might get you thinking. It's quite big, it's chock full of content, so I'm going to skip through it quite quickly. As I said, it's downloadable, so I've tried to make it a useful thing to use afterwards, as well as hopefully learn from now. Okay. Oh, cool. How's that? Good? Need to be on camera. So the BFI National Archive is one of the biggest moving image collections in the world. Some debate about who is, but we'll say we're among them. We're not the oldest. IWM is the oldest film archive in the world, as far as I know. But here's a kind of snapshot of how big the collection is. This is really the analog collection. I haven't attempted to quantify the digital collection here, but it's a very big collection. We store most of the physical stuff in vaults in Hertfordshire and Warwickshire in top secret locations. And that's our master film store. And that stores our preservation film elements. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you about, it was an attempt in the digital domain to replicate this robust, safe, permanently robust and safe, not just for the next 5 years. That really is a snapshot of our digital collection so far. We have 2.8 petabytes under digital preservation in 2 data tape libraries, and it grows about 10 terabytes a day. Up there in the top right, you can see a daily ingest, and the highest peak is over 200 uncompressed V210 MOVs. They're about 100 gigabytes an hour. So really that's about between 15 and 20 terabytes ingest on that day. That's not untypical for our ingest. So we're dealing with very high volumes of uncompressed moving image ingesting at scale. I'll talk to you a bit later about how we do that. It's quite a lot in that. This is the only BFI National Archive porn that I'm going to show during the presentation, but I feel obliged to show some archive porn. Analog, physical, digital, all on one slide. It really is a massive range of content. From the Mitchell and Kenyon collection that the previous speaker talked about, we have the nitrate for that collection, and we also have digitized it, and we have very, very high quality digital preservation masters for that content. So that's the end of the porn. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about film digitization and video digitization to give you a context of what we do. Our major film digitization project recently has been called Unlocking Film Heritage. We digitized 10,000 films from the UK's film archives. The BFI was only one of 12 or 13. We've digitized the entirety of the Victorian era film. There's over 700 films from 1895 to 1901, and they will all be available online this year, I think in May, on the BFI player. We've made them all available online as far as rights were made it possible, and we made a map interface, geolocations. One of the things we did in that project is to procure and develop and build a big digital preservation infrastructure. And that was serious money, public money, and we took that really seriously, and we tried to build a robust infrastructure. and I'll talk to you a bit later about what it means. And this is the earliest film we have in the UK. This is a snapshot of the Victorian film that we've digitized in our digital preservation system, 1895. I think all the films on this screen grab are 1895 and 1896. I find it fascinating to go back 120 years to find these really delicate, fragile films and then turn them into zeros and ones that hopefully we can preserve through time forever. Not that we're disposing of the film, but it's a bit harder to get at than the digits. So, okay. Our current and future big high-volume digitization and digital preservation project is a videotape. Probably you all know this, so forgive me if I'm telling you something you all know, but all videotape is obsolete. There's no more manufacture, there's no more support, there's no more machinery being made, there's no more heads being made. The skills are retiring out of the broadcast sectors worldwide. Videotape is the biggest, most urgent audiovisual challenge, I think that's safe to say. And the key reason is passive or active preservation of the analog carriers is not sufficient to make this content preserved, because you need to pass it across machinery to get it into the digital domain, and that machinery has a finite lifespan, as well as the skills, as well as degradation in the carriers. So this is urgent, and we're acting very, very, I hope urgently to meet the challenge. And we're going to digitize 100,000 works from videotape from the same UK film archives. That won't be all of the works, but it's a good proportion of the works. And it's broadcast and non-broadcast. And we had some good press traction. Mr. and Mrs. was the Guardian's focus for that. Don't know if you remember Mr. and Mrs., but anyway. So this is some of the television. We've already been digitizing at high volume and digitally preserving, and should say these frame grabs are system generated. We don't curate them and choose them. So some of them are wonderful and some of them are black. Happens to be 50% through the file, and it's a black screen, so don't blame me for the thumbnails. So those are the two big digitization contexts, 10,000 films and 100,000 works from videotape. So when I gave this a name, that was the name, but really what this is about is that how on earth do you do the digital preservation of 10,000 films and 100,000 TV programs in 10 years? So the rest of this is going to hopefully talk you through some strategies and tactics that will serve you in your own audiovisual digitization and digital preservation. Going to move quite quickly, so as I said, I don't expect to do a quiz after and for you to absorb all of this. Hopefully it's a useful resource for you to digest later and look stuff up. So I'm going to talk about a few strategies and then I'm going to illustrate them with specific tactics. But the first thing I would advocate, we're a national organisation, we're well funded, we have a large staff, but there is no way we could achieve this without engaging with a broader community, a global community. So I made a kind of, what would you call this, like a top ranked league table of the people I pester with questions about how to do this work. Dave Rice is, I'm really relieved I'm coming before Dave Rice because he's the hardest act to follow in audiovisual preservation, but he's on there along with some of the key people that I engage with every week to ask questions and answer questions and think aloud and discuss strategies. There's a really active community on social media and I encourage you to engage with them. No Time to Wait, some of you may know about, is now an annual audiovisual digital preservation symposium. And the third one just happened at the BFI South Bank round the corner last autumn. And there they are, Dave in the front row as usual. The next one is in Budapest in December. It's free. It's incredibly valuable if you're able to go to that, if you can raise a budget to get yourself to Budapest. I recommend it. My single thing I recommend from this is if you can come to No Time to Wait 4, you will learn an incredible amount. It's super valuable. The AMIA-L listserv is also a resource I recommend you sign up for. The Association of Moving Image Archivists. It's hosted by Kentucky University, but if you Google AMIA-L, it's a listserv where you can ask questions and get amazing answers from the world's, from a lot of these guys actually, but also a world of archivists across the sector. And you can ask questions like FFV1 Matroska, and you get hundreds and hundreds of detailed discussions by the world's experts. You can ask things like vinegar syndrome. You can ask things like, how do I digitize digibeta? And you will find answers. And if you don't find answers, post, and people will come back to you. So I recommend you join that. Another amazing resource is IASA. I think it's IASAweb.org. This, for example, is the Technical Commission Guidelines for the Preservation of Video Recordings. It's a biblical epic of information about how you deal with these plastic things with videotape in them. So IASA is another really useful resource. GitHub. Here's the now world famous Kieran O'Leary, winner of the DPC Digital Preservation Award last year. This is Kieran's GitHub repository. Maybe you don't write code, but one of the things I'm going to show you later is how easy and useful it is to learn a bit of code in this domain. And this is Kieran's winning repository, IFI Scripts, where he famously output, "Your files are lossless, you should be so happy," 3 exclamation marks. So GitHub, it's not just Kieran. Dave has a GitHub repository and some other people. Search it out. Ashley Bloor is another amazing person in this domain, and she has an audiovisual preservation training website. The link's at the bottom. You can go to Ashley's site and download training resources and learn and teach yourself an incredible amount. And she facilitates kind of crowdsourced documents, like what is the minimum viable video digitization workstation, with recipes for you have lots of money, buy this, you have no money, buy this, how to get the job done. Ashley it's an amazing resource. AV Preserve, the website is weareavp.com. It's also chock full of incredible resources. This was a blog written by Dave Rice and Chris from AVP about how you digitize DV, the DV family of videotape. And this is AV Preserve generally. They have lots of free to use products and some paid products, but I recommend you go and check out AV Preserve, weareavp.com. We engage a lot with the broadcast archives because we're called the BFI, but really our television collection is larger than our film collection. This was Steve Daly from the BBC, his presentation at No Time to Wait. It's really a kind of sales pitch for coming to No Time to Wait 4. You learn amazing ideas, like the BBC put their MD5 in the file name. It's such a simple strategy and such a useful strategy that we're thinking of emulating that. Having the MD5 in the file name, you can really, really simply build scripts or track fixity issues. Okay, next strategy. Open source tools and resources. I'm going to talk you through a few of the incredibly useful, I would say invaluable open source resources that we use for audiovisual digital preservation, and that I think most of the archives in the world are now using. FFmpeg. I proposed to William Kilbride, that in the next round of DPC awards, the developers of FFmpeg, I would like to nominate them for award, because in the domain of audiovisual digital preservation, FFmpeg is, I think, the most critical intervention. Everyone I know in every archive I know that is doing digital moving image uses FFmpeg, and if they don't know they're using it, they're definitely using it because it's baked into most of the systems you buy. FFmpeg, I'm going to talk you through it, and for those of you who are familiar with it and using it every day, I apologize, but for those of you who don't, I recommend you make friends with FFmpeg. What is it? It's what it says there. Converting video and audio has never been so easy. This is really true. FFmpeg is available for Mac, Windows, and Linux, so there's no excuses. You can grab it and use it. So you can use the TLDR, too long didn't read, once you're in FFmpeg, and you get this lovely thing. It's really cool. You can also use the manual, FFmpeg manual, and you get an even better, bigger thing. But you're in the command line here. It's a little bit command line-y, and some people are into that and some people are not. So, and it has an FAQ with an amazing detailed table of contents. However, I'm aware that that might seem very dry and quite an obstacle to engagement. So there's an amazing thing called FF Improviser. You can Google it, but I've put the link in there. So it says here, FFmpeg is a powerful tool, etc., etc. However, it also has a steep learning curve. FF Improviser's job is to bring you on a journey to get comfortable with FFmpeg, make friends with it, and use it in your work. FFmpeg looks like this, has a table of contents with permalinks you can store and go back to. What kind of things does it tell you how to do? Well, changing codec or transcoding teaches you how to, with a few lines in your command line terminal, transcode from X to Y, for example, transcode to create H.264 MP4 access files. FFmpeg swallows that for breakfast, and FF Improviser tells you how to deal with it. I won't go into all of them, but it is chock full of incredibly useful recipes. I call them recipes because you can copy paste them into your command line and hit return and off you go, or you can tweak them to your requirements. It's an incredibly valuable training resource. It has a section devoted to the kind of things you do as digital preservation practitioners, including creating checksums, checking decoder errors, and batch processing. So you have a folder with 200 files in. You don't want to do that manually. You want to script a process that will just run through the folder and deal with them. FF Improviser shows you how to do this in Linux and Mac and Windows. So just finally, I urge you to embrace FFmpeg if you haven't already. It's incredibly useful and powerful. We couldn't really work in the way we work at the scale we work with the robustness without FFmpeg, and FF Improviser is the gateway drug to FFmpeg. So FFprobe. FFprobe is one of the things you get in the FFmpeg project. FFprobe is a metadata extraction and analysis tool. It lets you query a moving image file and extract the metadata from its headers and display them in JSON or text or CSV, or my favorite, XML, of course. And then it lets you do things with that. You can visualize it, you can write it to a database, you can analyze it, you can build queries to find out problems with your files. FFprobe is part of the FFmpeg project, but it's incredibly useful. And there's an example on the right of an MP4, metadata extracted from an MP4. It's very useful for doing things like aspect ratio analysis. Are my files in this folder 4:3, 16:9, something else? Do I have to watch them all? Does the aspect ratio change? FFprobe will get you a really good, easy, fast metadata extraction. FrameMD5. FrameMD5 is a little obscure even in the world of AV digital preservation, but it's an incredibly powerful thing. So I thought I would expose its power a little bit and see if it's interesting to people. What is FrameMD5? Everyone knows what an MD5 sum is, right? You calculate a hash of your file. And then if you move that file, or you send it somewhere, or you get it out of your repository, you recalculate the hash, and therefore you know if the file is bit perfect, right? That's the game. If you have a 2-hour-long moving image file and you calculate a hash and you've had a problem, so your MD5 doesn't match, what you know is that there's a problem in that file. What you don't know is where the hell that problem is. So therefore you have only one option, which is to hope you can recreate that file from your second copy or your third copy, etc. FrameMD5 generates an MD5 for every frame of the video. And that is a really powerful thing because it can tell you precisely where any problems in your file have originated and can be found. And that means you can address them, you can fix them. But more importantly than that, and this is how we use FrameMD5. This is a blog by Dave Rice. Sorry, it was originally published in the IASA journal in 2012, I think. It's called Reconsidering the Checksum for Audiovisual Preservation. And the key use case that we make for FrameMD5 is verifying lossless transcoding. So I have a V210 MOV, an uncompressed QuickTime file, which is our video capture file of choice, and I want to preserve an FFV1 Matroska. How can I be certain that when I transcode that uncompressed QuickTime to my FFV1 Matroska that I have no transcode problems, that's entirely successful, bit-perfect transcode? FrameMD5 is the way you do that. You calculate an MD5 of every video frame from the source, and you calculate a MD5 of every video frame in your output, and if they're identical, you can be certain that you've captured all the video content losslessly. This is really powerful because when we do these transcodes, we tend to do them at scale, and we certainly don't have time to undertake detailed hand-holding. So the FrameMD5 is a vouchsafe that it's perfect. Move on, and we delete the source when the FrameMD5 for the output is sound. So yeah, Google FrameMD5. It's built into FFmpeg. You don't have to do another tool. FFmpeg does it all for you. An FFmprovisor tells you how. Okay. Media Area is a powerhouse in open source audiovisual tool creation. They're responsible for some of the most used tools in this domain. And you can go to mediaarea.net and you can see them all. I won't go into all of them in detail, but I thought I'd highlight a few. Media Info, if you don't use it already, get it. It's free, Windows, Mac, Linux. It's incredibly powerful metadata extractor and visualizer for moving image files. And it does all the things you'd hope. It does CSV, it does JSON, it does XML, it does HTML. It has a command line interface, it has a GUI, it has a web version, so you don't even need to download anything. It's incredibly powerful. I think there's been 50 million downloads of Media Info. If you haven't got it, I recommend you get it. MediaConch is a policy and compliance checker. It lets you declare policies about your moving image files. Must have this codec, must have this aspect ratio, must have this bit rate or a bit rate between these values. And then it lets you check all your files as you make them or get them. And it lets you fail them if they fail and let them through if they succeed. It's very powerful. Again, it has a GUI and a command line interface. QC Tools is really super useful tool for analyzing your capture of videotape to digital file formats. QC Tools lets you undertake visual analysis of the capture. Okay. Number 3, open standards-based archival file formats. What the hell does that mean? I'm going to talk about this guy. Possibly some of you have come across this already. Possibly some of you have wondered what it's about. Possibly some of you are already using it. So I'm just going to talk a bit about it and explain why it's I think it's a revolutionary intervention for moving image digital preservation. Hopefully I can explain why. So FFV1 is the codec and Matroska is a container, commonly has an MKV file extension. Some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute, when I used to go to peer-to-peer torrent networks, most of the ripped files were Matroskas. It's like a hacker's file. It may have originated in that domain, but it's now a serious contender for archival file format. I wrote a reading list about it, and it's probably a good starting point if this is of interest to you. I've put the link on here, but if you Google FIAF Matroska, you can go to the reading list. It's good old-fashioned PDF. But it has hyperlinks to all the stuff on the internet by Dave and other people. So if this is interesting to you, I would recommend that as a starting point. I don't get paid every time you hit it, but it's a good starting point. Why FFV1 Matroska? First thing to say is if they're both open, you can go online and find the specification. There's no paywall. No one owns it. It's not Apple or Microsoft or Google. It's completely open, and the specification is managed in an open repository. Michael Niedermeyer. You can go there and read it. You probably won't, but the point is if you archive your files in this format, you can store that specification with your files, and in 20 years or 50 years, you can pay a developer to reverse engineer using the specification as published. It's incredibly open. Okay, FFV1 is lossless and compressed. Normally compression in moving image, often compression in moving image incurs loss. MP4 is a great example. ProRes even, the great workhorse in our industry is ProRes. It's a lossy codec. So I always advocate to people who want to preserve ProRes, just don't do it, it's lossy. Preserve the lossless. So often we associate compression with lossy. The compression of FFV1 is lossless. Now this is a really powerful thing for moving image because moving image files are big, right? We have 2.8 petabytes of moving image files in our repository. An uncompressed V210 QuickTime is 50 gigabytes for half an hour, 100 gigabytes for an hour. When you convert that to an FFV1 Matroska losslessly, and we use FrameMD5 on the left to make sure it is lossless, we tend to yield a 22 gigabyte from a 50 gigabyte input. Now that is okay, that's trivial for one file, but if you have 70,000 of those files, not only the storage cost is incredibly reduced, but moving the files across your network is made much more effective and efficient. Sending the files, there is nothing not to like about 22 gigs instead of 50 gigs. So that's one of its major benefits. It's lossless and compressed. They're standards based. They're undergoing standardization via the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF. And you can join in, you can go to the link I've showed you there and you can read about the standardization of these. And that standard will hopefully complete within the next year or two, and this will be a ratified standardized codec and container format. This is a big deal for us, certainly in the BFI, and it's why we are committing to FFV1 Matroska. These formats are being managed and developed and maintained by archivists for archivists. They're not designed for industry, they're not designed for broadcast, they're not designed for digital cinema. They're designed for us, really, and they're being developed for us. This was a presentation Dave Rice gave at a MIA conference last 2017. Why is Matroska useful to archivists? And I've put the link there, you can go and read why it's incredibly useful. There's a whole set of tools called MKV Toolnix that lets you do pretty much everything you would want to do to your Matroska file. You can make attachments in a Matroska file. You can put in a database record, an XML, a story about the filmmaker, a biography of the filmmaker, any kind of attachment you want to put in that file. Matroska will support that, and then you can use MKV Toolnix to get the attachments out. So I'm going to end by talking about automation. And the reason we can achieve 10,000 films and 100,000 works is because we build automation workflows built with FFmpeg and some of the other tools I've showed you. We tend to work in Linux for this, and we tend to use Python, and we always use FFmpeg, but you can do the same in Windows or Mac. It's all doable. FFmpeg it doesn't care. Python also, you can run it on any of those OSs. We use APIs. Our three main systems have RESTful APIs, application programming interfaces, and what that lets you do is get data out and in to a database, and get media in and out to a media asset manager, and finally Spectra, which is our data tape libraries, get files in and out and check their validity, check their fixity. These RESTful APIs let us automate a lot of our workflows. We use BPMN quite a lot to visualize our workflows, business process modeling notation. If you haven't come across it, I recommend you look it up. It's a really useful model for visualizing workflows. And here's one we made for our batch ingest of our legacy data from LTO tape. BPMN allows you to model human processes, system processes, scripts, logistics in one visualization, and I find it very useful to draw my problems. I like to draw the problem to solve it, and this is a framework for doing that. We do a lot of visualization of workflows so that we can draw the steps, and this is one for our post-video capture processing, and it does things like transcode to FFV1 Matroska and validate frame MD5. And then it splits a whole tape file into program sections, because that's how we preserve, as a program, not as a tape. And then it lets us do very cool things like detect which is the aspect ratio here. Is it 4:3, 16:9, 14:9? And then we can move it into an appropriate workflow to create a good transcode for that aspect ratio. It uses Linux bash scripting and Python and FFmpeg and FFprop. And here's our automated ingest diagram. It's probably too small for you to see, but if it's of interest to you, you can see it more clearly on the PDF. What do? We validate the file against some policies like file naming and part whole and etc. And we ingest it using the correct workflow based on the record. We confirm it's been bit perfectly stored to our 2 data tape libraries, and then we delete the file from our network once that's all been confirmed. And at every stage we log the errors and the actions. So I'm ending here, and the last thing I'm going to tell you about is, as well as automating the ingest, we built an automation of the access, because what we couldn't achieve for this volume would be manual delivery of access. So in Southbank, round the corner, we have a thing called the Mediatek, and the principle is everything we digitize and ingest to our preservation repository, we create a transcode, and that is available instantly within 24 hours in our Mediatek. There's no human labor involved. It's a default. If it goes into a repository and it transcodes, it's available on the screens in the Mediatek. I think we have 20 terminals for users. And here's how it works. I won't go into the detail, but it ingests to our repository. It transcodes to create an HLS, HTTP live streaming, HLS. That's our access format. And what an HLS is, it's an H.264 MP4 inside an index. And the benefit of that is the HLS behaves like a streaming server. You don't have to download your 20 gigabyte MP4 to start playing. The HLS allows you to play it immediately, and it allows you to jump around without having the whole file in memory in your access application. That's why we use HLS. HLS is an Apple proprietary format, but it's okay, it's just for access, we don't care really. So we ingest it, we create the HLS, and within 24 hours it's available to users in our Mediatek. And it looks like this. These are collections created from the digital content by our curatorial teams. And there's also a search, of course, and there's an I'm feeling lucky option if you just want to see everything. And you can sort by date created, date ingest, genre, subject, creator. You can see the Mitchell and Kenyons here. Soon you'll be able to see the Victorian films after we publish them in May. You can also see lots and lots and lots of television, Mr. and Mrs. and so on. That's me. So I think I can take questions, or I can probably take not a question, really more of a comment. It's up to you.
Yeah, we've got sort of 5-10 minutes if anybody who has come out of the days. That was a really great sort of overview of information. Thank you, Stephen. Does anyone want to unpick that or ask any questions or share anything? Yes. Just give me 1 second to get to you with the mic.
Hi, this is a real numpty question because I don't do IT. Once you've actually scanned all these films and digitised them, do you actually destroy the source media?
No.
So you don't have that much confidence in what you've done, that means you keep the source media?
There's a key distinction to draw. Film as film is an experience the BFI intends to preserve. So we have an audience at Southbank who will always watch film projected as film. That is part of our mission. And there's a growing body of evidence that experiencing the film from its photochemical elements is an aesthetically different experience. And the BFI will preserve that. So we would never get rid of the film because that is part of our mission. Film as film is how it's often called. And if you listen to directors like Quentin Tarantino or Christopher Nolan, they shoot on film and they try to project on film. So film as film is a real thing and a big deal for the BFI, and it's part of our mission. It's slightly different with videotape, because in the future the ability to view things on videotape on those machines will more or less be gone, because the point is to digitize the video cassettes using the machines, and you wear the machines, you wear the heads, you wear the the moving components, etc. So there's a slight distinction. Film will be kept under optimum physical preservation conditions in the National Archive. Video, we may choose to dispose of some video cassette after we've made a successful migration from LTO 6, where we're at now, to LTO 8, where we'll migrate. At that point, we may make a decision when it's safely migrated. So we have LTO 8 and 2 data tape libraries, and LTO 6 on the shelf. We may at that point commit to some disposal. But we take that disposal really seriously.
Right, thank you. I've got a similar problem.
Any questions from this side of the room? We haven't forgotten about you. I can see you all. Yep, Glenn. No, hold on. You need to have the microphone for the remote listeners.
One of the things about the community I've been talking about is there are no really numpty questions. I ask numpty questions to that community every week, and they very kindly ignore what a numpty I'm being and tell me the great answers. So really there's no such thing as a numpty in this domain, because it's so big and challenging and complex that, I'm head of digital preservation in a national film archive, and I ask appalling questions every week, and they help me out.
Get ready for one then, Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Glenn from the Ridge Museum. Look, all of this is really impressive, but I'm kind of thinking of someone running a small archive in a small organisation, limited resources. They're probably responsible for lots of things to manage. How do they actually implement kind of a digital preservation program for audiovisual assets? Are there kind of tools out there that kind of end-to-end tools that they can use, rather than trying to piece this together themselves with little understanding of programming, technophobia from, having visited many of these websites in the past, they are a bit overwhelming if you don't come from a programming background. So what are the user-friendly tools out there?
It's a really good question. The first thing I would do is I'd go to AV Preserve. We are avp.com. They have quite a few documents about how you do exactly those things. Oh, I don't know where to start. How do I start shaping my strategy before I get into the nuts and bolts? So we are avp.com, have some good stuff. And you know what I would do? I would join a MIA listserv, and I would say, I'm new to this. I work in a museum. I have to shape my strategy. Has anyone done that in the last year or two? Can you point me at your documents that would help me? And I can't guarantee you, but I would imagine there are people who've done very similar things. So I would start with AVP, and I would go to a MIA listserv, and then I would engage with a community to ask them, has anyone done exactly this who's not from a moving image archive? How did you go about it? There's a lot of people on there to help.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm in calorie deficit by lunchtime.
Hello. I wonder whether you thought it was realistic for smaller institutions to create a workflow that they can be confident of, when we can dip into the free tools as much as possible, and with as much time and programmer support as we could maybe get, we can do that part. But the first part, when we put the VHS tape into a machine that we bought from eBay, that we've serviced ourselves or paid someone to service, that's the part that we worry about the most. So I'm sort of looking for whether you think it's legitimate for the smaller places to even think that we're making an archival copy at all, and whether it's worth putting all the effort in to make our FFV1, which takes a lot of overhead and time, rather than just making some sort of copy, an access copy, and leave the VHS on the shelf.
It's a good question. I guess the question boils down to a few bits. Is it worth the investment to create a preservation outcome from what you might think is a sub-spec VHS capture? And I would say yes. There's loads of resources on Ashley's site, and there's a collective called I'll find the link. They're based in San Francisco, and they do pop-up video digitization stations. And they have, I think, developed a kind of recipe for how you do VHS capture to a good level. So I'll try and find the link and circulate it somehow.
We can do that.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I think you can make a good capture station with limited budget for VHS, and I would commit to creating a good preservation file, not just an H.264 MP4, simply because if you do that, then you can create your 264 very easily using FFmpeg, or not. A GUI will do the same, but then you've got that preservation file to create the next flavor of access file, and when everyone wants a higher resolution access file, you can recreate it. If all you create is the very, very lossy H.264 MP4, you don't therefore have the option to improve your user experience later, which might seem okay now, but you might surprise yourself. You might find, oh, this is our most watched content. I'd love to up the spec. I have to recapture the videotape. What you really don't want to do is invest twice in that capture moment, because you'll wear out the tape, you'll wear out the machine, it takes time. So I'll try and find the transfer, I think it's called the Transfer Collective, where I think they describe a good VHS capture workflow. The internet is chock full of your friends, and they've done this stuff so you don't have to.